Welcome to my kitchen here at Trails N62. Today we're going to be doing kind of a different take on a video that I have already done. I did chicken tortilla soup. Now today I'm going to be doing beef tortilla soup. I eat a lot of chicken mainly because it's cheap, but I like beef better. And so if I can make it with chicken and I can make it with beef, I'll make it with beef when I can. So beef tortilla soup, that's what we're doing. The first thing we do when we do our tortilla soup, like we did the chicken, we're going to poach the beef. Now I took my beef, it doesn't matter what kind of beef you use, and I cut it up into 1-inch chunks or something like that. And I put it in my saucepan, I covered it with 1 inch of water, I added my spices. Now, I say whatever beef you want to use. You can even do this with hamburger. All right. So I covered it with the spices, and I put on it. I've got some thyme and some oregano, smoked paprika, garlic powder, crushed red peppers, and some Cajun spice. Now, this is beef. You can use whatever spices that you want to. You can use some steak spice seasoning in there, or you can use, whatever seasonings that you want to use on your beef, that's what you put in there. I didn't measure mine, I just put it in. It's in the liquid. I may or may not use this liquid for my broth. I'll have to taste it after I take the beef out and see. But the purpose of this is to poach the spices into the beef, just like you do with the chicken. So I brought it to a boil and I reduced it. I've got it on low simmer, and I'm going to low simmer it for 10 minutes, and then I will uncover it. It's partially covered. I'm going to uncover it and I'm going to let it set in the hot liquid for 15 to 20 minutes before I start the canning process. Alright, now my meat is poached, and the purpose of poaching, basically like chicken, it shreds real easy after it's poached. Different cuts of beef poach differently, so that's why hamburger is really good to use with this. I used about 1.5 pounds of this cut of meat, and I just cut it up in smaller pieces because it's going into a soup, not a stew. And you can put it in the whole chunks if you divide it up equally among the pints, because once it's been pressure canned and then you go to heat it up, that beef will shred real easily in the pot as you're heating it up. But I wanted to cut mine up first, shred it first basically, so when I put it in here that it'll get more of the seasoning in there. Now I used my poaching liquid here rather than beef broth, and now this recipe is actually for 7 quarts. But I've kind of cut it down to where I'm going to put it in 5 pints, so I'll probably have a little more liquid than I need. But I just cut the recipe in half, except for the meat. My cut happened to be about 1.5 pounds of beef. So that's what I'm using for 5 pints, is 1.5 pounds of beef to put into the soup. So I've got my 6 cups of beef broth, or in this case my poaching liquid. 6 cups of your liquid. Then you're going to put in 3 cups of diced tomatoes, and I'm just going to put the liquid in with it because it is a soup. Half a large onion. I'm using some of my dehydrated onions, so I'm using about what's equivalent to half a large onion diced up. Probably maybe a medium onion diced up to go in this particular 5 pints. You can use less onion if you want. You can use more onion if you want. Depends on how much you like. Next, it calls for 1 large poblano pepper, diced. and 1 large jalapeno pepper diced. So, yeah, say then maybe a medium poblano, or what I did was I took a large poblano, cut it in half, and just diced up half of it, froze the other half for later on. And then I had some frozen jalapeno. And see, it's the smaller diced stuff in there. That's my frozen jalapeno. I put what was about a half a large jalapeno or a medium jalapeno in there. So then it calls for 1 pint of chipotle black beans. I happen to have a quart of black beans with the juice. So I happen to have a quart of black beans, and I'm using them cut it in half. I don't have chipotle black beans, but what I do have, and I use, is this chipotle cubes. I put one of those cubes in my black beans. Here, you can use chipotle seasoning to add it in there, or you can leave out the chipotle altogether. It just kind of depends on how hot you like it. I like a nice spicy soup, and this is going to be spicy. Next, it calls for 1.5 cups of corn. Got 1.5 cups of corn here. In this instance, this is frozen corn. It's not all the way thawed out, but that's all right. I'm fixing to heat it up. So 1.5 cups of corn. In addition, I put a few more seasoning in here. I put about a teaspoon of salt, and then I put in about a teaspoon of seasoned salt. I added a teaspoon of cumin, and I put in about a 1/2 tablespoon of cilantro. I will heat this up, bring it to a boil. First I'm going to bring it up to when I bring it up to a simmer, let it simmer for a minute, and then I'll taste it and see if it needs more seasoning. If it doesn't, I'll bring it up to a boil. Now remember, you can always season it when you eat it. Okay, so if it seems to be under seasoning, it's better to under season it than over season it when you're pressure canning it. Some seasonings when you pressure can intensify during the canning process. So it's always better to under season when you're pressure canning than over season, because you can always re-season it, put more seasoning in, heat it up, whatever you want to do when you are heating it up. Now once I've brought that to a boil, I let it simmer for 5 minutes. My alarm's going off. 5 minutes is up. I'm going to add my meat to it. Let it simmer for maybe another minute to get that meat good and warm, same temperature as the soup. And then I'll be putting it into my jars. Alright, I'm ready to put it in my jars. Now the main thing to remember when you're doing soup like this, I usually like to layer stuff, and you could layer this if you had enough beef that you wanted to just put your beef in the jar and and kind of fill it up to about 1/3 of the jar with the beef, and then put the juice in on top of it. Make sure you debubble, and do it that way. That would work. I didn't have enough beef to do that, so I just had to cut mine up and put it in there. It's going to shred once it's been pressure canned. It will shred real easy. So you just pour the jar in the pan. You can use a knife or a fork and stuff, and just shred the beef up in there and mix it up as you cook it. All right. So the other thing is, this is all shredded up in here. Keep it stirred. When you've got stuff in soup like this and you've got your ingredients already mixed up, when you put it into the jar, stir it. start closest to me here. Keep it stirred. You want to make sure you get a goodly amount of mixture of solid and liquid. And then we're going to take it to 1-inch headspace. So we'll leave 1-inch headspace, and that's to the bottom of this rim on the jar here. My funnel happens to have 1 inch down there, so I just fill it up to the bottom of the funnel in a regular mouth. It doesn't work that way on wide mouths, but on a regular mouth it does. Alright, I'm going to fill the rest of these up. I'm going to cap them off and put them in my Nesco electric pressure canner. And I'll be canning these pints for 75 minutes, and in my case 15 pounds of pressure. That depends on where you live, on your altitude, but mine is 15 pounds, and I'll can it for 75 minutes, and then we'll see what the result is. And yeah, before we go, just wanted to remind you here, wipe your rims down with vinegar. Make sure your rims are clean. I like to say this every time because it's important that your rims are clean, that there's nothing on the tops of your rims, because that will prevent it from sealing. So make sure you always wipe those off, get them good and clean on the top, because it's easy to drip on there when you're moving your funnel and everything. Alright, there's my 5 pints of beef tortilla soup. They all look pretty good, didn't have any siphoning, didn't have any leaking. All the jars seem to have sealed good. So, but I'll have them set for about 24 hours before I do anything to them. And looks like it's going to be good. Now, just like the chicken tortilla soup, you can make the tortillas, cook them in the oven, put them in there, and if you want to go into that explanation, I did that on the chicken tortilla soup. But basically, it's just as easy if you want something quick, easy, and simple. Heat up your soup on the stove and get you a handful of corn chips. Not corn chips, tortilla chips, corn tortilla chips. And just crumple them up, put them in your soup. Basically, it's the same thing. Only it's a lot easier. You don't have to go to all the trouble cutting the tortillas, frying them up, or baking them in the oven or something like that. You may like that better. If you want to do that, do it. There's no problem with that. It's probably better tasting, but I don't put anything in my soup because I don't even put crackers in soup. A lot of people like to crumble up crackers and put in there. Just do the corn chips or tortilla chips the same way. I guess you can use corn chips if you want to, but tortilla chips would be more close to what you're looking at. But I just wanted to mention that about eating it. I eat mine just plain. I don't like, I don't like crackers in my soup or anything else in my soup like that. Some people do. I don't. So, but if you want to put the tortilla chips in there, if you want to make your tortillas, cut out them tortillas on your soft tortillas and cook them up and make them that way, hey, go for it. Anyway, beef tortilla soup. Alright, so that's it for beef tortilla soup, and I just want to mention one thing that I failed to mention when I was putting the jars into the canner. I do put my lids on, and then I put the bands on. I tighten them down finger tight, as you do in all your pressure canning processing. You always put them on finger tight. So I didn't mention that. I was naturally assuming that you'd all seen the chicken tortilla soup video, but not everybody has. So I thought I better mention that because I don't want to confuse you on how to put those on. They're all done the same basically. But if you don't know, if you're new to canning or something, you may not understand that. I just screw the lid down till it just hits snug, and then I just give a little snug with my fingers. And that's what I call finger tight. So, that done, the processed all came out good. And I do boil water and then shut the water off and put my lids in the hot water. They say you don't have to do that anymore, even though I was using ball lids in the Golden Harvest, which are basically ball lids because they're made in the same place. They just don't say ball on them. But I still do that. I've always done it. They say you don't have to on these new lids, but hey, it's always worked for me, so I'm not going to change now. I know it's a little extra step, but I'd be better safe than sorry. It does soften them up a little bit. That's the way I do it here in my kitchen. In your kitchen, you do it however you want to do it. Anyway, beef tortilla soup. From my house to yours, from my kitchen to your kitchen. Till next time, God bless.